Hello, and thank you for clicking into Cuppa Americano. This is a conversation with Danny Bate. He is a linguist and author of the book Why Q Needs You, which follows the history of the English language, and host of the podcast called A Language I Love Is. Today, we talk about the origins of English, its Germanic roots, and heavy influence from Old French, Norman, Latin, and Greek. We discuss how sounds and spelling have changed from the Norman Conquest to the introduction of the printing press, share some thoughts on the challenges of learning and acquiring new languages, and strive to understand why English spelling came to be what it is. Enjoy.
That beer, I think we have to decide which beer that's going to be. I know. Okay, so there's a couple things. You already
Yeah.
have some thoughts. I'll let you go.
No. I know. I want to hear yours. I want to hear yours because I've gone on a journey with regards to Czech beer, and I've maybe ended up back where I started. To be honest, but please,
That's
tell me.
interesting. I'm curious where that circle ends, but in my case, I have two. So first of all, Pilsners. It's got to be a Pilsner, especially from Czech. And by the way, I did see a map some time ago that said that showed me that per capita, Czechs have the highest beer intake. I don't think it's all alcohol, but it's very particularly beer intake. And once you've had Czech beer, you understand why.
You do because it's not just that you might like it, but also it's lighter than other countries' beer, so you can get through more of it. Yeah. Okay, fine. I agree in that regard. But okay. So here's my thinking about Czech beer. Maybe you can put this in the outset section. So I come from the UK, which has a lot of variety. So the UK pub is the first thing you want to see when you walk into a pub in the UK is a variety of beers on the bar, both the stuff that come from the pressurized kegs and the stuff that comes from the old-fashioned hand pulls. We call that real ale, right? A variety. The Czech Republic is the exact opposite. A pub ideally has one beer and they serve it really well. So I arrived here in this country many years ago, expecting to be like, to want to dig into the beer scene and identify the best beer. And I wouldn't want to just settle on Pilsner Urquell, the leading brewer of the company. I don't want to settle. I wanted to find my own beer. And then 10 years later, I'm like, no, Pilsner Urquell is the best.
It's so good.
It's the best.
So good.
It's such a vanilla opinion, though. I really want to do better than that, but it is the best one.
I guess because you're in the Czech Republic right now, it seems like that's vanilla. But as an American living in the U.S. right now, you don't find Pilsner Urquell. So if I mention Pilsner Urquell, that sounds like very exotic, like, oh, fancy, But we have microbreweries here. That's the big thing. But Pilsner Urquell is just, what's funny is there's so much advertisement for it as well. Like I was just thinking there's that astronomical clock in a plaza there and all the little tents, they're all Pilsner Urquell. And you're like, I guess that's the only beer available in the country. That's not the case, obviously. But even if it were, I would have no arguments against that.
No, I'd be fine with that, to be honest. I'd survive just fine. Yeah, okay. I dabble in the other beers, and some of the best pubs in my specific area actually don't. They're not the ones that serve Pilsner. They serve something else. But okay. I will say this: next time you are here, this is elite and dangerous advice. Is that I actually recently ruined Pilsner Urquell for myself. Because
how is that possible?
How is that possible indeed? Because I went to the source. I went to the town or the city of Pilsen, where it's all made, and it's a great town. Highly recommend it. Also, they love Americans there. They have an American festival every single year, because unlike most of the Czech Republic, which was liberated by the USSR in the end of the Second World War, Pilsner was as far as the American army got. So they're very big into American. You can see like. When I was there, they were having one of these festivals, and there was just GIs walking around the place, and it was brilliant. But this is the danger: you go straight to the source, like I did earlier this year. I went with my father-in-law for a kind of it was called Škola čepování, so like the school of pouring, so like training to become a bar staff, and it was frankly it was a booze fest. Nobody learned anything, but they have at the brewery a type of Pilsner, an unfiltered type that they don't sell anywhere else. And it is perfection. It is better. It is somehow, it is like exquisite. My whole family, all my in-laws and everybody, like my wife is just like, this is incredible. And I've not been able to stop thinking about it since.
Unfiltered. And you have to get it directly from the source, I suppose.
They don't sell it anywhere else. Oh, no,
that would be...
I tell a lie. There's one restaurant in the city of Pilsner owned by the brewery. So that's the two places in the world where you can get this elite kind of beer.
I think next time I come out to Czech Republic, I'm gonna have to grab some for contraband and bring it back, and we'll have the great debate versus pure unfiltered Pilsner Urquell and the microbreweries which are popular in the U.S. now.
Okay.
So that would be a great one.
Everybody will have a great time.
I will have to try it. There is another one. I forgot the name of the city. I think it's Budvar. Does that sound right? It's south.
Budvar. Yeah.
Budvar. Budvar is where Budweiser comes from.
Yes.
And Budweisen is actually it's a very, very good beer. I enjoyed it immensely. Okay. The American version of Budweisen is Budweiser, and we have Budweiser, and Bud Light. And this is like, it's fine.
It's okay. I've had worse.
When you go to a bar, you don't really order Budweiser or Bud Light. You order the microbrewery stuff, or IPAs are popular here. Lagers are big, but like it's the kind of thing you buy a 12-pack for, and then like if you're having a guest over, it's just easy to get a ton of it.
Exactly.
It's bulk beer.
Yeah. It's bulk beer. That's the model. If you have a big party, and if you've got people who just fancy a beer, it's all good. It's all. I'm not a beer snob in any regards. There's not many beers that I really kind of turn my nose up at. Although there are actually a couple of Czech ones that I don't touch.
Really?
I doubt you would have had them. They're not really widely served in the city centre or places like that. So it's all good.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, there's a market for mass market beer. Anyway, okay. So Danny, I'm wasting this opportunity. I'm not wasting it. I'm very happy to talk to you. But when I started this podcast, I started about 6 months ago. Okay. And I had spoken to some friends, trying to get together a few things, and one of the things I told them was like, I often get the question, what's your podcast, what exactly do you want to do? And one of the things I said 6, 7, 8 months ago, I said I would really love to talk to a linguist, and now I have that opportunity, and I dare not waste it. And this started with I think I forgot the guy's name exactly. I want to say Norman Ohler. He wrote a book called Empires of the World, and it was it was it's a history of languages throughout, and he spends a lot of time on French and Spanish.
I've got it back.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, got it there.
Oh, wonderful! Yeah, it's a fantastic book, and the English part is like the longest part. It's at the end. He kind of saves it, but I mean, his whole thing was, how do languages spread, and how do we continue speaking them? And he spends a lot of time on Greek as well, and he's like, Phoenician and Greek are that was so well known around the Mediterranean back in the day that now it's kind of remarkable that Greek is kind of confined to the country now, and not the entire Mediterranean like it used to be, or at least a large part of it. And then I read your book, Why Q Needs You. I see you've got a copy back there. I got a copy here. We're just chatting.
I've got one or
about
two.
That. Yeah. Phenomenal book. We're going to get into a lot of that, but loosely speaking, it's a history of the English language. There's so much Greek in there. And it's funny because I read that and I was like, oh, we kind of have come back a little bit in a circle where actually a lot of Greek inspired English in multiple different eras. I thought that was fascinating. And it also inspired Latin a lot. So you get this influxes into the English language in so many different directions. And before we kick off, there's one thing I want to say.
Sure.
I wrote down this quote. There's this Argentinian novelist, Jorge Luis Borges. Okay. And he said something. I'm going to repeat it. And it's very controversial in Argentina. And I know this because I said this in Argentina, and people were not happy with I said it like 2 or 3 times, and I stopped saying it because people were like offended by it.
Okay.
But this is what he said. He said, English is a far finer language than Spanish for its variety, and end quote. And he said this because it has variety and precision in vocabulary. He said that the English, you could say the same thing, huge and humongous, big and large, but they have slightly different meanings, where I guess a lot of Latin languages are more confined to, like, they're like French, like Spanish is more Latin than English is German,
Sure.
from its old roots. So I thought that's fascinating. I think that's interesting, and I'm slightly biased as a native English.
But you were putting people into a bit of a tricky situation there, because on the one hand, they're not going to like what you say, but also Borges was from Argentina, so they don't massively want to disagree with one of their greatest novelists, who is a very brilliant man. So yeah, maybe it could have gone worse.
It's a rock and a hard place. And let me just say this. I love the Spanish language. I got to like level B1, B2. It's so beautiful. It sounds lovely. There's so much variety. There's a lot of richness in the language. A lot of that comes from the idioms and the accents from all over the world. So I love Spanish. I absolutely love Spanish. It sounds so pleasant to the ears. But I wanted to kick us off on a positive from a great.
Sure, yeah. And next time you're in Buenos Aires, maybe lead with your opinion and then give them the Borges quotes rather than the other way around. Yeah.
Before they run me out of the country.
Yeah. Well, they're passionate people in Argentina, so yes, for your own safety.
Yeah, and very understandably so. So I was thinking where to start, and there's so much to talk about, and I think we can kick off with the history of English, where it comes from, and how it's like it sounds so different than we know today. And we can start off with the Isles. So the Isles used to be Roman occupied. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but it was a Roman territory.
Sure. Yeah.
And why don't we start from there? What was the language? What was going on? When did English enter the British Isles?
It's a great question, and actually, it is also perhaps the best possible place to start. There are many ways in which you could start discussing English. You could also go anti-chronologically. You could start right now and work backwards. But if you're working forwards, then focusing in on the island of Britain, this large island off the coast of Europe, is a really good start, because English is not, invented out of nothing, out of thin air in Britain. It arrived there. It was brought over to Britain, and the people who brought it would have been speaking a kind of, let's say, Germanic. Like it's a great aunt of today's modern Dutch, modern German, and the great grandmother of today's modern English. But it wouldn't have at all been any different from what they had left behind. People don't get in a boat and start speaking something differently when they get out of the boat at the other end of their journey. Of course not. And these people might have gone backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. What I'm getting at here is that English has this incredible prehistory, thousands upon thousands of years of prehistory, which we can trace, that we can talk about, we can maybe get into with regards, with thanks to history and archaeology and linguistics. But all of that is talking about something that isn't yet English. English is born when it arrives in Britain, because now at least you have an ocean between these populations of Germanic speakers. I say ocean, it's the North Sea, it's not that big, but nonetheless, differences are going to start to creep in. They're going to start to build, so that slowly, very gradually, the people who are still in Northern Europe and the people who are now on the island of Britain are going to sound quite different to one another. It may start off as a kind of accent, it may progress to a kind of dialect, and eventually something that is so different from what they left behind on the continent that we can call it a separate language. We can call it English. And this could take the form of very subtle sound changes, vocabulary changes, grammatical changes. But it's a great way to start talking about English, because it's we have to hold on to these little things. Everything is so fluid in language that we have to hold on to these very concrete events, like moving to Britain, where you have the geographical distance to allow a new language to just naturally develop. And for context, this is all happening probably around the 4th and 5th centuries AD. So Britain is very much a province of the Roman Empire. You can call it Roman occupied to begin with, but towards the end of this period, Roman Britain, they think of themselves as Romans. They elect emperors and send them off to be emperor in Rome. They build Hadrian's Wall and they build villas. They're very Roman. And it's my favorite subject. So you may have accidentally activated my trap card. It is my favorite subject in the world, but I will do my best to calm myself down. It's a kind of black box. We have a very prosperous, very well-to-do part of the Roman Empire, if the villas and mosaics and treasure is anything to go by. And stuff happens, and then a couple of centuries later, let's say, the year, where do we put it, 600 AD, We start to get writings in a different language. We call it Old English. It's Germanic. There are kingdoms like Wessex and Mercia in East Anglia that weren't there before. There are no Romans in sight. Nobody really thinks of themselves as Roman anymore. So it's a kind of black box. You put in this, province of the Roman Empire, and you get out England. And it's endlessly debated. How much did the English speakers cause this change? How much did they just exploit some sort of pre-existing chaos? We don't really know. But we've got lots of great ideas. But it's out of this movement, let's say the year 400 to 600 AD, that Germanic speech arrives in Britain, and out of this, we'll get English eventually.
Okay, I'm gonna try sharing a map here. Let's see if this helps us or not, and if it doesn't, we'll get rid of it. But you can kind of scroll through different times here.
Brilliant.
So yeah, actually, even during, so this is all Roman Empire right now, 372 AD for listeners. It's funny because I wasn't quite sure what was going on those isles before the fall of Rome, and then you mentioned the boats and the people coming off them. These were, correct me if I'm wrong, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were, I guess, sorry?
Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah, those are the traditional names for these people. Yeah.
Okay. And they were coming out of, I guess, what was called Germania, like today, Denmark, Netherlands, Germany. And they were crossing over into the English Isles at that time. And they were bringing with them this Germanic language, and they were mixing it with, I guess, Latin, and like typical Latin, like someone speaking Latin in the second century from the UK, today's UK, and if they went down to Rome, they would be completely mutually intelligible. Maybe there's some accent differences, but they would understand each other. That would not be an issue.
Sure. Exactly
Okay.
that. Yes. I belong to a kind of school of thought, or a group of people who think that, as you say, Latin was a widespread native language of Britain. How would it not be? The Romans were there for about 400 years. So at least people in the far south, closest to the continent, they would have spoken Latin.
Okay. Yeah, I think I heard that Caesar got it pretty close himself, during some of his Gallic invasions. He did get somewhat close to England. He might have even sent some of his own people to go into the UK. I'm not sure
went
about
there.
that.
He went there. Yep,
okay.
Caesar went to Britain, which is incredible. I mean, this is maybe a tired old way of explaining it, but I've heard it described as a kind of like a massive PR stunt. He knew that he couldn't permanently occupy the place, but from the perspective of his audience back in Rome, the people who might cheer for him, maybe had the power to vote for him, this was like landing on the moon. This was huge. To get to Britain. Britain is something that if you're living in Rome in about the year when is Caesar 50 BC, and you hear that Caesar's landed in Britain, you go, people land in Britain? So Caesar made it there very briefly. He then just went back.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he did a little PR, and then he came back. Did he but it was Roman at the time. Like, it was completely Roman.
So it would become Roman through people like Caesar. Specifically, you have to wind the clock forward to when would this be? 50 AD, and you have the Emperor Claudius. Claudius is an emperor, and he he leads the permanent occupation of Britain.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And before, I mean, there was there were people there already.
Yeah.
Presumably, they had their own language at the time, or were they also speaking Latin?
No, so they would have spoken quite a different language. I think people, maybe well-to-do people, may have learned some Latin because you have this big growing empire on your doorstep. You're probably going to learn some of the local language. But the majority of the population would have spoken a Celtic language, something that in time would become Welsh. Hasn't gone anywhere. It's just now to be found in Wales.
Very cool. Okay, so listen, well, a couple things. One, for listeners, you guys should definitely get into the book, because we're actually covering things that are not in the book. So you're going to get a whole fresh set of ideas in the book related to this. The other thing is, I did listen to your podcast. By the way, you have a podcast. A language I love is
Thank you.
And I started with English, but I like the Romance languages as well. So I do love Spanish, and I'm studying Portuguese at the moment. I did study a little bit of Polish. By the way, dzień dobry. No, den. Dobre den.
Dobry
you,
den,
right?
dobry den,
Dobry den,
hezky,
dobry
yeah.
den. Yeah. In Polish is dzień dobry.
That's right.
They kind of flip it.
Just to be different.
Just to be different. Yeah. I would love to, if we have time, we can chat about Slavic languages as well. I think that's rich in history, and you have some notes in your book about that, especially with Cyrillic. I was very curious about that. Saint Cyril, I think, is the one who introduced it.
Yep. So, he gets a mention. Absolutely.
This stuff is so fascinating to me.
It is.
But anyway, yeah. So you mentioned the Celtic languages, and I listened to your podcast with on the Irish language, and I wonder, is it fair to say that the Welsh language and Irish are related? And if they are, is this also related to the Gaelic languages, or is that different?
No, short answer is yes. That's a very easy one for me to say. These are all related languages. They form a family with a family tree, not a particularly easy family tree to connect up. I would say this much, in that if we wind the clock back to, let's say, the year 0, sorry, there was no year 0, 1 AD or 1 BC, something like that. If you go back that far, you have a big group of languages and dialects. We call them the Celtic languages. So the main representative, perhaps the one that we have the most writings in from this period, is called Gaulish. This is spoken in what is now France and Switzerland and bits of Germany as well. This is the language of Asterix and Obelix, if people like French cartoons as well. And of not entirely certain. So basically, what people are speaking in Britain and Ireland is also a Celtic language of some kind, and this will become Welsh and also Irish. I am maybe being a little cautious with my words because how exactly they all join up with each other is a little clear. It's a little unclear. If you were imagine, I don't know, you go to a party and you've got large members of somebody's family, like you go to a wedding, and you can clearly see a huge amount of family resemblances, but you're not entirely sure how they all join up to each other in a strict genealogical progression. That's kind of what it's like to deal with the Celtic languages. They share so much, so many key features and words that allow us to say these are all kindred. But what probably happened, and this is big probable, but you probably once upon a time had an original Celtic language. We call it Proto-Celtic. This is not controversial, and this would have been spoken on the continent. And groups of speakers went in all different directions, down France into Spain, eastwards into Germany, reaching as far as the Czech Republic, and successive waves may have headed over to Britain and Ireland. And this may be a couple of waves. The first wave goes so far it reaches Ireland, and a second, later wave reaches only Britain. And that explains the differences between what becomes Irish and what becomes Welsh, because there are some quite key differences between them that mean that we can't say that they had a single origin, or that we could call some kind of Brito-Irish Celtic. It didn't really happen like that. But so the language that develops in Ireland we call Irish or Gaelic. This will become the modern languages of Irish, Scots Gaelic, and Manx, spoken on the Isle of Man. And the one that reaches Britain we call Brythonic, after the island of Britain, and this will become Welsh, Cornish, and weirdly Breton, spoken in France. So people probably in response to the arrival of the English, maybe people actually emigrate and set up a kind of kingdom that spans Cornwall, which is the southwest of Britain, and also this northwestern tip of France, and that will become the Breton language, still spoken today, but it suffers very much from French influence.
I did appreciate in your book you mentioned quite a bit of the Norman influence, old French, old Norman into English, and a lot of interesting things come out of that, especially with the interplay with Latin. So this, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things here. For one, just to make sure I understood that correctly, so you're saying that these Celtic languages entered the Irish province and the today's British Islands in different eras. Is that correct?
Yeah, let's say like successive waves, I might describe it as. It's just a theory.
Okay.
It's a theory to account for why they are different in certain key regards.
Okay, and then they might have picked up different influences before they got there. So, for example, a later succession might have had higher Latinized influences than an earlier one, possibly.
Sure. So people talk about this. There do seem to be words that we can't really account for, and
Hmm.
people have pointed to a handful of words in the history of Irish that aren't Celtic. We don't find them in Welsh. We don't find them in Gaulish. So they look a little bit like words picked up from whoever was already there. This is all happening in what would this be? The arrival of Celtic in Ireland, this sort of Iron Age, which in the global history of humanity is not that long ago. So there were undoubtedly people already there. And then Celtic speakers bring the language over, and maybe they pick up some words when they get there.
Hmm. You mentioned this. So one of the words that I thought was fascinating that we've only seen once written down in English, and you mentioned has caused quite a bit of confusion in the linguistic circles. Is this word "noff"? And let's see if I have it marked
Yeah.
on how it's used. And I remember the way it was used, I thought was kind of funny because it sounds kind of insulting, but not really. So this is Chaucer, The Miller's Tale from your book, 1390. I'm going to try to pronounce this as best I can, Middle
Go
English.
for it. Go for it.
Whilom there was dwelling at Oxenford, a rich noff that guests healed to board, and of his craft he was a carpenter. With him there was dwelling a poor scholar, had learned art, but all his fantasy was turned for to learn astrology. A rich noff. And you
Very
call that
nice.
word out specifically, which I thought was hilarious because I was like, that, if I use that today, I think someone would just, it sounds kind of like gnat. Like, quit being a noff, a noff. And I bet this is the most interesting part. I bet if I used the word noff and nat in the same sentence, someone would actually be able to spell the word noff.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm so pleased that you picked up on that because I mean I only highlight it in a footnote at the bottom of the page. That I just want to. It serves two purposes for me. But firstly, it's just fun. I like
Yeah.
to speak for you. It's just a fun little fact that here we
Oh,
have this
yeah.
word that doesn't occur anywhere else in the history of English, and so we don't really know what Chaucer meant by this word. But secondly, and a bit more seriously, I definitely want to invite all my readers into the debates. That all of this is not fixed. There is like every single word in the history of English has been debated and fought over, and there could be a whole academic article devoted to discussing this one particular word. Indeed, there has been in the case of North. It's all this kind of ongoing conversation, and I love the idea that people might take it away and go, "Huh, there are words that someone like Geoffrey Chaucer, very famous English poet, very important if you're studying English or the history of English, and we don't really know what he meant by this word." I love that.
Yeah. There's so many tidbits in here. And I think this is one of the things that just makes English so fascinating is the variety of how many things have entered into it. I mean, one thing that I think speaks in a positive of English is it's adopted from so many different historical eras. Like the Vikings, the Normans, the French, the Greeks, and the Latins, and multiple times too. That I thought was the most fascinating.
Sure.
By
Yeah.
the way, one thing I thought that before I read your book, and I was wondering about this when I read Empires of the World as well, which is how do we study languages? And what I mean by that is how can we make any claim as to what pronunciation was like? How can we make any claim to what a letter sounded like? How can we make any claim to where the letters came from? I mean, I read your book, so I have a sense of it now. But before, I was thinking to myself like the the alphabet, the abecedary, that came and we stuck with it and it never changed. Because in my lifetime and in anything in the last, like I would say, anything written since Enlightenment, it's hard for me to say like, oh, the spelling really changed. I mean, like I've read the U.S. Constitution. Probably the oldest thing I've read from the actual language was early 1700s. Shakespeare, I guess. Actually,
Yeah.
that's a really good example. Shakespeare is a fantastic example. But like even in Shakespeare, I could read Shakespeare and I could say, okay, I could see quite easily where a word in Shakespearean English turned into modern day English. It's not a leap of faith.
No.
But when we go older, especially before the printing press, you see artifacts that just are mind blowing. And I was very curious about how do you put that evidence together to make any claim about spelling, pronunciation, language movement, and letters?
Cautiously. That's the way you do it. You do it very cautiously, and you build up a case drawing on all kinds of evidence. I think it's absolutely fine to doubt any claims that people make about the past. Not unreasonably doubting, like, you would just ignore anything that sounds like a good idea. But I do appreciate this because we weren't there. Speech is this thing that we humans do. We've been doing it for probably hundreds of thousands of years, and it disappears. As soon as we speak, it's lost. Before the invention of things like the device I'm using right now, the things that record sound. So it's good and it's fine to doubt these claims, but there is a wealth of evidence of, let's say, indirect access to speech that we can use to build our cases. So take, for example, let's not go too far back. Let's go for Shakespeare. Shakespeare probably did not sound like I sounded or you sounded. He had a distinctive accent. Why do we claim that? Lots of people would love it if they could, they'd love to be able to claim that Shakespeare sounded exactly like them for reasons of personal pride, but he didn't. How can we say that? How can we know that? Shakespeare uses rhymes. Shakespeare uses rhymes. He is a poet. He's crafting sonnets. He's crafting verse. There's rhyming in his plays as well. He has full liberty as the writer of Shakespeare to choose the words. Why would he choose words that don't rhyme in modern English? Answer, he wouldn't have. He would have chosen things that rhymed for him. So a really nice example, in the history of more recent English, probably since maybe Shakespeare's day, but increasing in the 18th century, the W sound, the W sound, before an A in a word like, warm or war, has changed the sound of the A. So in my English, it's war, an or sound. It's warm, war, water. In American English, there's an additional sound change going on. It's happening right now, which is making it more like war and water. And that's fine. That's just an additional sound change on top of the English. But neither sounds like a simple plain A. Like water for nobody is pronounced like water. It's not water, it's water for me, water for you. It's not water, it's not war, it's not warm, right? Rhyming with arm, right? Those words don't rhyme. But they do in Shakespeare's sonnets. He writes things like he rhymes the word glass with the word was. So was, it would have been pronounced was, glass was. Or another one he rhymes warmed with disarmed. So it's probably disarmed, warmed. And there are actually a couple of dialects in England where people still pronounce words like this. They still say warm, water. So that's backing up the theory as well. What am I getting at here? That is maybe not an obvious thing, but it's a great help. Rhyming, alliteration, the choices that people use in, say, poetry allows us to be pretty confident of how speech sounded for them. Alliteration, puns are another good one as well. So people are punning things. Shakespeare, for example, at one point makes a pun on the words knight and night. So night as in not day and night as in the one with the sword. And he can make that pun probably because the K, the silent K in the one with the sword, has now become silent. Whereas Geoffrey Chaucer, writing in the late, 14th century, so before Shakespeare, he alliterates, so he matches the initial sounds of a word like knight and a word like king. So it's probably knicht for him and king. We can back this up then by looking with other languages. We can look at, say, German, which has a word like knecht. It's fairly similar, or used to be similar in meaning, and it's similar in sound as well. You can have a knie in German, your knees. In English, it's just knee. Today, the K has fallen silent. But there's a wealth of information, indirect information, that allows us to kind of triangulate what speech of the past must have sounded like to explain the things that we still find today in, for example, poetry.
That's very clever. That's very clever. And I think it does. I mean, I remember reading Shakespeare back in high school, and we were reading rhymes, right? And I put that in quotes because, with our American, not just Americanized accents, but with our modern English pronunciation, a lot of times I remember asking a question like, "This doesn't even rhyme. Who is this Shakespeare fella just creating poetry that doesn't even sound the way you'd expect?" But yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of depth. I mean, I think you did mention something that I thought was really fascinating in your book, and it does make a lot of sense, which is that we might look at English, like knight is such a great word, Knight. And there was the Monty Python joke about like the British knights invading the French, which is great.
Yes.
It's funny. It took me a while to understand that joke, but it's a brilliant joke. But you did mention like a lot of the silent letters in particular, they were pronounced. And there's another quote. I could bring this up later if we would like, but I think it was another Shakespearean one. Yeah, there was a pedantic teacher in one of his writings who said like, you don't say doubt without the B. It's doubt, right? And so connect. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but something like connect or connect is the way that they said it in the French. That used to mean something, and then there's always the question of, well, do we remove it or do we not? And that's been a heated debate. And I do now understand quite a bit of why we would not want to, especially in the English language, change those spellings, because the implications are actually a lot deeper than we'd see. Yeah, so we were just chatting about the spelling of English, and I think let's get into that a little bit. So other languages, well, I'll talk about Spanish since I'm a little bit more familiar with that.
Sure.
Most of Spanish, I would say, like practically every single word is phonetic. Is that the right phrase? Phonemic or phonetic?
I prefer phonemic, but I know people know what you mean. Like it's based in sounds as a letter to sound relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll say phonemic, which is there's very close to a 1-to-1 between a letter and its sound. So if you come across a letter in Spanish and you've never seen it before, you're in the fortunate position where you could say it and you'll probably be very close. You'll be correct. And this is not just in the sound, it's also in the accent. Like there are rules in Spanish and how do you where do you enunciate, where do you apply that accent, and it's very beautiful in that sense. And of course you do get variety depending on where you are, and there are exceptions here, but in English you really don't get that. And can you help us understand why?
Yeah. It's a big question, and I think it's the right question to ask because it allows us to appreciate that it doesn't have to be this way. The spelling of English is it's not ideal, and it's not something that any language has to put up with. We could change English spelling, and people have thought long and hard about changing the system. I have kind of identified, two massive themes, and I hope your listeners won't go, "Oh God, not two massive themes." Off he goes again. But big themes that are kind of like forces of nature working in the background of the history of the language, and together maybe they make the current state of English spelling inevitable. And we can pick them apart, but I'll just maybe outline them very briefly. The first one is natural sound change. Sounds change. So they change down the generations. They change, as people grow up. The points of change may be when we first learn language from our parents, and it differs in very, very subtle ways. And those the differences may increase as we go back in time through our grandparents to our great grandparents. People, might have a vague feeling that people, their great grandparents at least sounded old fashioned. If you hear people from that generation in recordings, or even somebody who lived a very long time, like the late Queen Elizabeth II, she sounded different in very specific ways at the start of her reign than how she did at the end. So sounds change, and this is just a completely natural process. There's nothing to worry about. But if your writing system is sound-based, then the discrepancies are going to creep in very gradually, and you will find them in every sound-based writing system. I know I'd put money on that. So you say Spanish is very phonemic. I would agree. I think Spanish is, so is German, so is Italian, to name two more examples. But you can still find ways in which Spanish, or at least some dialects, are departing from the writing system. You have, for example, the kind of almost silent plural S at the end of certain words in Spanish dialect. So it's very common to rather say los gatos, you're saying lo gato. So you're departing there already, or you have the difference between B in the beginning of a word, or a V at the beginning of a word, and the V in the middle of a word as well. So something like vamos, which is more like a B sound, as it's opposed in the middle of a word, where it's more like a V. So you have these differences, you have these subtle departures, but we're so linguistically good that we just learn them. We just learn the rules. We learn, either consciously or unconsciously. So that's the first one. The second, then, is rather than the development of English speech, it's the development of English speakers. English is not this gas. It doesn't exist independently of people. It's tied to a growing population of speakers since, as we began our conversation, since the 5th century AD, and then, whatever it was before it arrived in Britain. But you have lots of key historical events that create this unique situation. So you have things like the Norman Conquest in 1066. This floods the language with a lot of words and some sounds, and most importantly, spelling practices, because who is spelling during this time? It's people with resources and money. They tend to be people who are connected to the continent and the language of the Normans. And English then gets, shall we say, Frenchified or Normanified. Like its spelling system is maybe it takes a step away from how it used to be spelled in the so-called Old English period. So things like QU, which English really doesn't need. We could just spell it CW or KW or even with the single letter Q, but we get QU from things like the Norman Conquest. We then have the Renaissance, where people gain access to, better access to French and Latin and Greek, languages of antiquity. These lead to things like the B in debt and doubt, as people are trying to spell more like the Romans. But all of these are completely reasonable instances of history and circumstances affecting spelling. Spelling mirrors the circumstances of its time. The big one, even bigger than, say, the Norman Conquest of 1066, which is like the only date that you learn if you went to school in England, as I did. Apart from that, the even bigger one is that we haven't had a kind of central body tidying up spelling for us. A very undemocratic, usually officially appointed academic authority that sets the rules of spelling. We've had dictionary writers. We've had very prestigious people, someone like Noah Webster, or Samuel Johnson in the 18th century, hugely influential people, but no single person or organization that could tidy up spelling and keep on top of sound changes. This is how other countries do it. Spanish has things like, the Royal, what are they called? The Royal Society of Spanish. And they decide Spanish spelling. Of course, as Spanish becomes a language of more and more independent countries, especially after the 19th century, this society is probably going to have less and less influence because they're based in Spain, in the old world. But nonetheless, such a society exists. And Czech, where I live, Czech has the center or the society, the faculty for the Czech language, and it's been keeping on top of these changes. English has just never had that, and so ever since our kind of standard spelling emerges roughly in, I'd say, the 15th century, so 600 years ago, with the arrival of the printing press, it's all been very organic and very fluid, and it's all worked kind of by consensus, which is nice and democratic, but it leads to a mess in spelling. We've lacked that kind of, say, authoritative or maybe autocratic organization to say, no, we're going to get rid of this letter, or we're going to, tidy up this aspect of spelling. We've never really had that. And now, as English, gets given to even more countries of the world, the so-called, the commonly listed English-speaking countries like the United States and Canada, but also countries that aren't usually included in that list, like India, or I don't know where else does people, everywhere, it's everywhere these days.
Yeah.
As more and more people take on the language, reforming spelling just gets harder and harder. So with those two factors combined, natural sound change and the history of the English-speaking population, combine them, it's kind of inevitable that our spelling would look like this.
Yeah, to speak about it today in modern terms versus, like, say, before even the arrival of the printing press, they're just two completely different environments. And you mentioned a lot of the factors that we'd have to consider today to make this happen. First of all, the countries where we do have English as the native language, U.S., Australia, the U.K. How are we going to get agreement just between those countries? I mean, they seem pretty close, but they're not exactly the same. And recognize, I think, is a good word, where the Z and the S are switched out at the very end. There's a few other small things like the extra U in color or something like that. But to apply that now becomes infinitely more difficult, because also English is a very common second language all around the world. It's sort of, I think it's kind of like, in some sense, it plays the role of Latin or even Greek during the Enlightenment or the medieval era, where even if you say, especially let's say during the science of the 16 and 1700s, like Newton, I'm pretty sure, wrote his thesis in Latin, not in English, because Latin was a language of science, and it actually happened with, I think, German as well for a short bit of time. So this is the role that English is playing, is that sort of medium between two different languages, because that's just kind of defaulted, and we can certainly get into
I think it's a great parallel.
how that yeah, we can certainly get into how that kind of happened and what that means. But it's it's going to be hard to convince, say, like, I'm pretty sure English is a very common second language in India. It's going to be very hard to, like, convince India and America and Canada to all say, from now on, you all universally have to adopt the U. I was thinking, though, about the gatekeepers, and I call it gatekeepers. I was thinking about who are the gatekeepers in the U.S. in terms of English spelling. Like, if I were to submit a paper or an article for publication, say, to a magazine, to a book publisher, whatever, in the U.S., they would demand I remove that extra U. But if I were to, so I did I went to grad school, and in grad school I worked on fluid mechanics, and there's a very prestigious journal based out of Cambridge called the Journal of Fluid Mechanics. And when we published there, we very much had to write in British spelling, which was perfectly fine. Like, it's kind of nice to actually kind of learn the differences. And the spell checker would keep telling me I'm wrong, and we have a little argument back in the day. But it was like the gatekeeper in that particular instance would have been the Journal of Fluid Mechanics. They're the editors. They're the ones that say, no, this is a British journal, and just add a U in. It's no big deal.
Sure. Exactly. Yeah, and it's good you're thinking about it, but it's all so personal. At the end of the day, this kind of gatekeeping, or the person who sets the tone, we think that spelling works a kind of like gravity, like it's this law that exists independently of us, but it's all so extraordinarily personal. Spelling follows prestige and therefore power, so it's no surprise that English standard spelling, in as much as it is standard, when it first emerges, is really based very closely and spells really well the accent of the center of power in England, which is London. Standard English spelling reflects London, and as this standard slowly took hold, it would have run roughshod over a huge amount of diversity in England. Diversity is usually it's squashed through technology and through means. If you have access, if you're able to write like the most prestigious people, you start writing like them. But there would have been lots of people, as this London-based writing spelling system takes off, whose accents are not being represented. So right from the get-go, spelling is going to ignore a lot of variety and is going to match power, as people naturally want to spell like their social superiors, or even, even if they are socially superior, they want to spell like their peers. And this is now the same problem hasn't gone anywhere. It's now just replicable on a massive scale, because if we were to reform spelling today, it would look like, what we even base it on. We'd probably base it on, if it's UK based, it would be, again, my accent, what's traditionally known as RP, received pronunciation in the UK. I like to refer to it as the international evil accent. But if it's American based, it might be some kind of East Coast old money, power, prestige, Ivy League type accent, or alternatively kind of Silicon Valley Californian accent. It's not going to be the accent of, God love them, someone like the people of Mississippi, like deep South in rural poverty. It's not going to be that kind of speech. Even if it were, even if, let's say, American English gets then based on a Mississippi accent, then the people in California and the Ivy League are going to complain. So what standardization always involves a loss of accent, and it always involves annoying somebody at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, a nice example, an easy change that you could, an easy change. There is this massive split, right, in the English speaking world with regards to accents, and it's all to do with, do you pronounce the R at the end of a syllable or a word? So this is in a word like car, a word like heart, a word like bird. Now, for me, coming from southern England, specifically southeast England, I don't pronounce the R. There's no recognizable sound that matches up to the R. We still need it, because if you take the word out, if you take the R out, the words become something else. Bird becomes bid, heart becomes heat, but fine. Let's say we're reforming spelling and we take it out, and then we're Britain, and this is the accent of Cambridge and Oxford, these centers of prestige. They're okay. Our reform spelling is going to be based on this type of accent where you don't pronounce the R. Instantly, you've alienated the entirety of the US and Canada, because people there generally, they have rhotic accents. They're not non-rhotic, they're rhotic. They pronounce the R. So it's car or heart. There is something there that corresponds to the R. Okay, so the pendulum swings. So instead, we go with what is the most populous and most powerful English-speaking country today, the USA, and we go with USA. We reform spelling and we make it rhotic. But then instantly, in a flash, you've annoyed the entirety of Boston, where they don't pronounce the R. So nobody is satisfied in this question. And all of these factors aren't me trying to excuse myself and saying, suck it up, just learn this outdated spelling. All of these factors are me, is me saying, I don't know. Like, I literally wrote a book, not the book, but a book on the history of the alphabet and the history of English spelling, and I don't know what is the right course of action.
I think it's so fascinating to just kind of ponder where things are going to go, because the printing press changed so many things, where it at least brought a level of standardization, and it wasn't complete, but it did at least, there was a lot more clarity for Shakespeare than there was for Chaucer with the printing press. There was a precedent that was set and propagated throughout. And with the advent of the internet, and now especially, like, at least with the internet, written publication became a lot more popular. But now we have crazy things like TikTok and Instagram, where now we get the audio and the visual. Well, the visual doesn't really matter, but the audio as well. So, like, the pronunciation, I wonder how that is either going to evolve in terms of either fixing itself or becoming even more diverse. I wonder if the variety will go up or down. But it's a curious thing. I did want to tell you about the first time I heard the English accent. There's a movie. There's a movie called Snatch by Guy Ritchie.
Yeah,
Guy Ritchie,
of course,
the director. Yeah, and the first time I heard, I guess, if I remember correctly, let's say there's about 3 different accents in there that I remember. One is the King's English, like the proper standard London accent. That was okay. I could kind of understand that, but it was still like, whoa, this is so cool, The other one was the Cockney accent, and I could not stop laughing. And I could like kind of understand it, but I thought it was all fake. I didn't know it was a real accent. I was like, oh, they just made something up. It's a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun. This is great. I could get a feel for what's going on. That was great.
Yeah.
Then there was the gypsy Irish accent. Brad Pitt played that character.
Okay.
And I didn't know what to think of it. I actually didn't think it was English for a long time. I did. Again, it was about half the movie passed before I realized that is speaking in English.
Sure.
And it was like it was a marvelous entry into exactly what the diversity of the English language truly is. Like it's so deep, and there's a lot of these historical advents to it. And what's really cool is that the more you listen to it, and the more you hear it, the more you can, it almost feels like you did just pick up a second, or,
yeah.
It's kind of like picking up the second language, not exactly, but at least a code of a different language. Where now I hear the Cockney accent, I still like it, I still think it's very cool. There's a lot of color to it. But it is different. And as I was thinking about just in the UK, how diverse all the different accents are, like the northern accent, southern accent, east, west, Wessex, we talked about. I was curious, like, how did that happen? And in your book, you spent some time discussing the Great Vowel Shift. I'd never heard of this. And I was completely unfamiliar with it. And again, in the audiobook, you talk through it, and it's great to hear like the accent as well, because some things that I want to hear your thoughts on this that I thought were curious were that before and after the Great Vowel Shift, and we should get into what that is, you can hear different accents. Like you can kind of hear the Scottish accent pre-vowel shift in certain words. And you're like, oh, so that makes sense, where you can get that historical sort of happenstance where, people do talk differently because the written language was not keeping up with the pronunciation.
No, this is exactly it. Yeah, and of course the irony being that we have something called the Great Vowel Shift, which all kind of happens after the bare bones, the skeleton of standard English spelling is kind of fixed. That's not great. Like, this could happen. So, we date the Great Vowel Shift to say like 1400 to 1700. It happens very slowly, very gradually. And English spelling is a product of the 1400s. So as I refer you to my point about my two big factors, the first one being natural speech change. That's not great for spelling if you kind of fix your spelling and then you undergo something called the Great Vowel Shift.
Yeah, it's I think some of the examples were like the double E, the double O, and I could not, like, it was funny as you're saying it, my brain could not even comprehend that these vowels could sound so differently.
Yeah.
Like if I remember correctly, I'm gonna take a word and feel free to provide clarity here, but like boot could have been like boat or something.
Yeah, it would have been boat.
And it was still double O at the time, right? So it was still BOT, and they're like, oh, it's boat.
Yeah.
And then some form or fashion, somehow, I guess, like people were speaking in a certain way. I guess it became boot. And now boot is I think that's quite common amongst a lot of different languages. Well, I don't know. How would the Scottish say boot?
Boot. Yeah, so they would go along with that one as well. But yeah, it's very nice. We're just so used to thinking about these things. I mean, it's very difficult for me as an author because within the field of linguistics, we have very precise ways of talking and writing about sounds. We have the so-called, international phonetic alphabet. This is not the NATO one, Alpha, Bravo, Delta. It's not that one. It's the one that it's the big table. And it's all about, firstly, identifying the sounds that we humans can make and giving each one a dedicated symbol. And this is so useful, and it's a skill that you pick up. If you study linguistics, it becomes second nature, but it's not very well known. So for writing about sounds in a silent book, this is not interactive. It's just paper. So it does guiding the reader towards the the correct sound that I'm talking about at a particular time was quite difficult, especially because English readers associate letters and combinations of letters with very specific sounds. It's very hard to kind of break out of that mindset or ear set, you might say. And these are not the same sounds that a non-English or non-native English reading person might have. And it's such a great example. Double O is oo. It's the sound oo. But for most people in the world, somebody whose native language is German or Finnish or Czech, they think a double O is like a longer single O. So single O is O, and a longer one would be O. That is how a double O was once pronounced. But then the Great Vowel Shift happens. It shifts any long vowels like an O sound. So bought becomes boot, and consequently the combination OO changes with it. And you get the English situation where it's very hard to break out of that and not think of, say, double O as anything other than oo. But that is something specific to English.
Yeah, that might be one of the few places where if you see the double O, it's always ooh. I don't know if it can be other things, which now sounds like a rarity.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But where I am, for example, in Czech, you have the word zoo, the word for zoo, but it's pronounced zo, which is kind of logical if you think about it.
I think that's similar in Spanish as well, where they actually keep the double O, and you actually do pronounce the double O. It's just slightly longer.
Yeah.
Zoological. Zo is that extra O, and it's like it is enunciated, which is very fascinating. You know?
Very logical, and specific to English, then, that we pronounce it oo. Yeah, there's the IPA. If you go up a little bit, if you go up to, you've ended up on a dental click. That's not the full, that picture there, that's the full IPA as it currently stands. Yeah, they do make updates from time to time, but this is the IPA. And I know at first impression it may sound strange, but it is an enormously useful thing. It's just not that well known. Knowledge of it is increasing. You will get people around the world who actually embrace it in teaching English. They embrace it. But I find that so fascinating that people would resort to this alternative system, which just shows you how much English has diverged from spelling. I was talking to somebody from India whose child is now learning English, and their child is learning the IPA along with learning English. And that just shows you the divergence, because you shouldn't need that. Your alphabet should be enough for you to know the sounds of your language, or any language for that matter. But no, that's the scale of the divergence, and consequently they're learning the IPA.
Does this cover every single sound made in the English language?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're all there.
It does.
They're all there, but they're just not spelt as we will recognize them. The IPA is a European-based project, so some of the symbols are, they represent the sound that you would expect them to, but others don't, because again, we're trying to be very precise here. We're trying to give one sound for one symbol for every sound. So, for example, the TH in English, as in a word like thorn or thistle, that's just given one sound, and it's the Greek letter theta. It's as you say, it's the dental combined with fricative. That's the first one. So th and the. English has two sounds behind its spelling th. There's th and the, as in a word like thigh, attached, part of your leg, and thy, as in old-fashioned language. There's two separate sounds. And they tend to be distributed differently at the beginning of words. One is for meaningful words that refer to things and actions, whereas the we find in functional words, like there, that, this, though, words like that. But English spells them all with th, because that difference post-dates the spelling. The difference in speech comes later than the fixing of the spelling. What are we going to do with the IPA? Well, we'll give them two separate symbols. That's in that little box there. Fricative plus dental. You've got two sounds, th and the.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. The in the previous cell. Th, the, s, z, sh, zh. I'm working backwards in the mouth. Sh. What would that be? Retroflex. These are very common in, you get these in the Polish, for example. Sh, zh, If you study phonetics, you end up making a fool of yourself. But these are the sounds.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to me. A couple things. One, I actually thought there would be more letters or more symbols because one of my questions I had was how many sounds do we have in English and elsewhere, and I'm actually really surprised it all fits in a single page. Like that's remarkable.
Yeah.
The other thing is in my study of Polish, I did come across this distinction between like the DZ j, but I don't think I ever figured out how to pronounce it because I think it's harder than a j. It's not like it's like not a soft G. I think it's more like a j. J and j, which in English, I don't even know if I do this in English, but like it's so distinct that it's very difficult to consciously make that distinction. So when I was studying Polish, I just ignored it. I was like, for now, I'll just stick with the soft G. I know people understand, like dobre dzień. I don't know, like it could be dobre dzień instead of dzień, which I don't know. It might sound the same on this microphone. I don't know, but it's very subtle.
Yeah, very subtle differences, and you can leave those subtleties alone. You don't have to lean into them, but if you want to think very precisely, what are speakers doing with their mouths, and what is a foreign accent? Why don't I sound like them when I'm speaking this language? Well, then phonetics is the field for you, because this is the field that talks very precisely about sounds. So you have consonants there, you have the vowel diagram, it looks like it's called the vowel trapezoid. It's not a square, it's something resembling a trapezium. And this allows us, what you're looking at here is not just all the sounds of English, this is all what we think all the possible sounds, or all the documented sounds of all spoken languages on that page.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's like the cheat codes, basically, that you're looking at.
Very cool. Yeah, this would be so well. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that this is not standard, or maybe it makes more sense in Europe where you have so many languages next to each other, and in the U.S. In the Americas, you have primarily 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Portuguese. But if you're in, say, North America, you'll only encounter like with depth Spanish unless you really have to seek it out. But you can get Spanish. But whereas in Europe, you're going to encounter multiple languages, and it's much more accessible, I think, to get that in depth. Like, for example, if you're in the UK, a 2-hour flight will get you in French, in native French, native Spanish, native Portuguese, native Dutch, native German, native Irish, all of that within a 2-hour flight, and so I wonder if that is why this is something that you would see more there.
I mean,
it is very fascinating, though.
It is scientific at the end of the day. That's not me kind of gatekeeping. It's not perhaps everyday useful for the everyday. I would say this is really for focusing specifically on sounds. If you were going to learn a language and you learned it through how it's written in the IPA, that would be weird, because you also need the written form as well if you're going to go to that country where they speak that language. So it's really something, it's a great concept to have in your back pocket. If you are struggling with a particular sound, you're trying to learn a foreign language, look it up. Look up its dedicated Wikipedia page. Learn what is going on with the mouth and the throat and the lungs. What are the qualities of this sound? And then try and replicate them. Because I think there's a lot about the pronunciation of languages that is not directly addressed, and consequently people have quite a foreign accent. Because what you're doing there is you are approximating the sounds that you struggle to produce, that you don't have in your language, with ones that you do have in your language. So the best example, so I'm a daily Czech speaker. I have to, because it's where I live, and the Czech is infamous is that it has this unique sound that is currently not found in any other language of the world. It's this unique consonant. It's an R. It's written with an R with a little upside down hook above it, and it's pronounced sh, as in a word like rzeka. It's like a j and a r combined at the same time. And this is an infamously difficult sound. Even people from neighboring countries can't pronounce it, like Slovakia. Czech Republic and Slovakia were one country for quite a while, but famously Slovaks can't pronounce this sound. They just say j instead. That if they're not trying. But I can pronounce it like a native speaker because of phonetics, because I'm aware that this sound has been studied, it's been examined, I know what its qualities are, and then I can try and replicate them. It's not an instant recipe for success, but what I'm getting at here is so much. The production of sounds is often just kind of left in the background when we learn language. It's all about the words and the grammar, but the specific qualities of a sound are understandable, they're learnable, and therefore they are replicable. You can learn them, what's actually going on.
That is I'm curious what your thoughts are on adult language learning, because there is this idea that I've heard where children, especially young newborns, in first 2 to 5 years, it's much easier to acquire a language because of the way the brain physiology is set up. And I don't fully understand that, but there is, I mean, the observation is that a kid will pick up a new language very much more quickly than an adult, including the sounds. So, a kid who's been moved around to who's going back and forth between 2 different countries can end up with a perfectly native accent in 2 different languages in 2 different countries. And like I know from my own travels with Spanish, going to different places, it's kind of funny because people would like, if my Spanish is good enough at the outset, they would say, you have a very interesting accent. I have no idea where you're from. And they're, because they're like, you're clearly not from here, but you're like not from anywhere I know. Like, you don't have a Mexican accent, you don't have an Argentinian accent, you don't have a Spanish accent. I don't know where you're from, but like you have a weird accent. And then when they hear me speak English, they're like, oh, that's okay. Yeah, it comes together. It makes sense. And it's like, it's those very minor things for sure. Like I and you did mention the aspirations, which is I think very common in the Caribbeans, like lo gato, like you have that H sound.
Fun, isn't it?
It's a lot of fun, and it sounds really nice once you like the more you hear it. But I do have some. I do have a little bit of a issue with the trilling R. I've been trying to get that trilling R forever, and I convinced myself it's impossible as an adult. And I don't know if that's true. You clearly disagree, unfortunately, so I lost my excuse.
No, I don't disagree, but I also don't agree. That's the problem. There is debate on how much of this is, let's say, practice, and how much of this is, it could be something mechanical or lingual. There is some properties of the tongue. I lean towards the fact that it's just it's a mechanism, a mechanical motion that is possible for everybody, but ideally it's learned very early on. Otherwise, you just struggle. The reason why I don't tend to agree with theories that say it is truly something mechanical that some people just don't have access to is that populations of speakers of languages that do have this sound, most people pick it up no problem. Like that, most people do pick up the rolled R, percentage-wise. There's some people who will struggle, and there may be specific reasons why they don't pick it up, but the majority do. And that says to me that it's something that we all, in theory, have access to. But if your native language doesn't have this sound, it's going to get harder and harder as time goes by, because it's like you're literally exercising a muscle in a way that you've never exercised it before. The tongue is a muscle at the end of the day. But with regards to second language acquisition, I think I firstly agree. I can definitely agree with the idea that it is harder to pick up a language as time goes by. And there are 4, your listeners may sigh, but I can think of 4 reasons why this may be, and altogether they lead up to, a problem. And the first one, which is perhaps the most famous, is this theory that we have a genetic predisposition to language, and this is reflected in a kind of golden period when we're very young. This is much debated, the idea, to what extent humanity has an inbuilt, innate genetic compatibility for language. What might be innate? What does it look like? Is it linguistic? Is it something non-linguistic that we as a species have just co-opted to create language? Huge debates over how much this is true. But I think there is probably something that leads to a kind of critical stage for language acquisition, and it's very young. So that would be the first one. The second one would be beyond the language. It would be a general kind of plasticity. Your brain is quite plastic. Your muscles are quite plastic when you're young. And this allows you to pick up new skills in a way that, generally speaking, the progression of a human through life is your muscles getting less plastic, your brain getting less plastic. You're building up neural pathways, and you're building up muscles in the ways that you need them. And therefore, your natural bodily plasticity, it will eventually coalesce, it'll fuse around your particular language. And this may, I refer to the brain and muscles because you have your capacity for learning new languages up here, and your capacity for learning a spoken language with your tongue. And if you're not, at a very early age, you're more versatile, this decreases as time goes by, and this will affect your ability to learn and produce another language. That's reason number 2. But these are often discussed. There's just a couple more that I like to throw into the conversation, which I think are quite important. The third would be that learning a language, a foreign language, as an adult, or maybe let's say post-childhood, is kind of exponential. So people struggle with the second one, your second language. You will have experienced this, I'm sure. It's kind of exponential. The biggest challenge is the first foreign language you try to learn. You haven't got the techniques, you haven't been through the process, you haven't dealt with the emotions, embarrassment most of the time, in a way that just builds and builds and builds with every new language you attempt. You've just been there before. You're better equipped. You've done battle with the previous language, like, I don't know, leveling up in a game. The first boss is going to be the hardest boss. The boss at the end of the game, like if you're trying to learn, I don't know, Basque or something, it is going to be really difficult if that's your first foreign language. But if you've learned a bunch more, even to a minimal degree, you're just so much better equipped emotionally, intellectually. So that's reason number 3. There's reason number 4, which I like to throw into every conversation. Children, especially infants, have a lot less going on in their lives. They have a lot less time, have a lot more time. Yeah. So I just always feel like I'm throwing this in there, that we as adults make foreign languages fit into our busy lives. And they are busy because we're trying to breathe and not die and eat and drink and go to the toilet. We've got a lot going on, to say nothing of our jobs and things like that. Yeah. I'm sorry, but an infant does not have a very full calendar.
So they don't need to worry about filing taxes yet.
No. So I just want to throw that in there as just maybe a little point in favor of adults, that, regardless of everything I've mentioned, all of these forces that may feel like they're beyond your control. My God, I'm getting older and this language is so hard, and I've never tried to learn a foreign language before. You're busy.
Yeah.
Unlike, say, a child learning their native language. So those are my 4 reasons.
I think all of that makes sense. And I think one of the things is also that I found personally very helpful was immersion, where you have that forcing function where you can't get around it, right? If you're like, hey, I would really like a cup of coffee, and if you're in a city or a country where English levels are low, you have to adapt very quickly. Unfortunately, we have a lot of tools now, like Google Translate is there, so if you really need, to find the bathroom and you really don't know how to say bathroom, you could pull it up. But odds are you could say baño in a lot of languages and it'll get you where you got to get to.
Yeah.
But another thing with immersion, and I mean, you mentioned this, if you're a child, I was thinking about this when I was in, especially in my early stages of Spanish, where I remember in front of me was I think it was like a mother and daughter, like a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and the mother had the daughter order for them, and she helped her. It was like, that's adorable, that's amazing, but that's also like something that like she's getting that opportunity not just to practice language and build confidence. Like there's a lot of amazing things about that little scenario, but one of them was also if she doesn't speak the language, her mom can help her speak the language. And then, I go to order and I'm trying to figure out how to say things. And I'm like, I sound like I'm very limited in my ability to speak. But I also don't get to witness that sort of assistance. So I do remember, like, every now and then going to dinner or something with a friend, I would listen very carefully to how they interacted with the waiter. So I can pick up all the little things. Like, for example, if you go to a cafe or something and the beginning is, it could be some small talk. Oh, how was your day? Busy with a lot of tables. At least the weather is nice. And you kind of get a sense of like, oh, okay, right. You're not so anxious about what you're going to order, and you can kind of relax because you're like, I know the script. I can kind of hear what's expected, and that gives you some ease. Because I agree with you. Like at the beginning, there's just so much anxiety that even if you do have some understanding of the language, it goes over your head because you're just like, I hope I don't get this wrong.
Sure.
Fortunately, with Spanish, I don't get that anymore.
That's good.
I would like to go down to Brazil, and I'm kind of curious about experiencing that with Portuguese. It is. I mean, like now it's kind of exciting. It's like, oh yeah, it's going to be kind of fun.
Yeah, but it's not nerve-wracking because you've been through the emotions, and you know that ultimately,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It's something about failing in your first foreign language that is so embarrassing, and you panic, and it's a very unpleasant experience. Failing in your 10th foreign language is like, oh, whatever. Like whatever.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not saying like, you should learn. You need to learn perfectly 10 foreign languages. It's just the 10th one that you've given a go, and you're there like, okay, what have I said now? That's my reaction when I make a mistake in Czech. Like it's now kind of like, oh, to begin with, mortifying, absolutely like soul destroying when I realized, the terrible things that I've said. But I've just said so many terrible things. The world's not ended. I've been okay, but you do need to power through that. And so maybe having been embarrassed in Spanish will mean that you'll be much less embarrassed in Portuguese.
Yeah.
Mm.
One thing I wanted to talk to you about is our inflections.
Okay.
So we chatted a little bit about this, and there are different kinds of inflections, and I think by the way, let me say, correct me in case I say something incorrect here, but inflection is effectively how a word changes, and a great example of that for anyone who's studied a Latin language is conjugation. We have this in English a little bit as well. I am, you were, am, were. Those are conjugations of the verb to be. And people who've encountered Spanish have seen this in terms of all the different verb conjugations and different tenses. That collectively is that is a subset of what is known as an inflection. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. And inflection,
Okay.
it comes from a Latin word meaning to bend. So it's the way that an individual word bends this way and that.
That's nice. Yeah, flex.
Flex.
That word,
Yep. Flex,
that root
flexion.
flex.
To genuflect is to like, dip your knees, make a bow. Yep.
It's all related. I love
related.
that. But so other inflections in Spanish would be at least if you have an adjective, you have to change that adjective to agree with the noun. If it's male or female, you have the plural. So all these things need to agree with each other. That's all, coming from English into Spanish, all of that was very new to me. I mean, there are exceptions where we kind of do this in English, but for the most part, it's less common. So getting to Spanish was very difficult to just understand these new concepts. And I was like, all right, I got to a decent degree on that. I did get to subjunctive, and I have some understanding of subjunctive, but we'll hold off on that. When I started studying Polish, I encountered what is known as a case. And a case threw me for an absolute loop. First of all, there's male, female, and neutral. So they have a third one. They change slightly different.
Yeah.
And you now also have to deal with these things called cases.
Yep.
So we could get into that, but I want to know, do you think that there are languages that are just more challenging from a conceptual perspective than others? And like, of course, I have my bias because I'm a native English speaker.
Yeah.
And then there's Slavic languages, there's Greek, there's and there's Latin languages, and they all have, in my understanding, different degrees of inflection.
Yeah, this is just it. So you rescued yourself there with the add-on that it is about your perspective. You can call it bias. Bias sounds negative, but it's just about your starting point, your native language, right? Do I think there are languages which are just more complex? No, I don't. If they were just more complex, they wouldn't exist. There is a kind of natural processing power with the human brain that we all share, being the same species, in addition to that, we all more or less share the same world. Yes, of course, fine. Different parts of the world look pretty different to one another, but nonetheless, our daily interactions, our knowledge of the aspects of language that come from our body, in regard to our our psychological perspective on the world as we see ourselves, we see other people, we make a difference between who we're talking to and who we're talking about. We are very aware, we're very fluid in conversation about things that have been mentioned and things that haven't been mentioned. We're more or less, there's a kind of foundation to the human experience and a foundation to the human brain's capacity for linguistic complexity that constrain how complex languages get. And what I'm actually trying to say here is that no, there is a kind of fundamental level or a quality of linguistic complexity. The difficulty comes from your starting point. So take most languages, pick a language from wide selection. It will be easier for somebody who speaks something closer to it. And that's not a matter of brain capacity or inherent objective difficulty. That's just a matter of genealogy. That's a matter that you speak a language that shares common ancestry with the one that we're talking about. So we'll take Czech. Czech bamboozles a lot of people. It's so often thrown around, the fact that it's so hard and people who move to the country shouldn't bother to learn Czech. We're talking about Western immigrants. We're talking about people coming from the UK and Britain or France or Germany, anywhere to the west of the country. Yes, these are not Slavic languages. And it's absolutely fine. It's an okay shorthand to say it's difficult. What we mean there is it's difficult, or it's going to be difficult for you. If we just look elsewhere, you have a whole country sharing a border with the Czech Republic. It's called Slovakia, where Czech is so easy they don't even need to learn it. It's so easy that you can just speak and learn Slovak, and you get Czech for free. So, I mean, come on. Okay, so that people think, okay, well, what about other languages? Let's broaden. Let's go looking around other parts of Europe. We have languages like, say, Finnish. Finnish, I get it. It's difficult. It's difficult because it's different. Why is it different? Because it doesn't belong to the wider Indo-European family of languages that most European languages belong to. It's not a matter of difficulty, that's a matter of genealogy. So Finnish is very difficult unless, say, you're Estonian across the water, across what would be the Gulf of something, Bithynia? No, that's somewhere else. Anyway, if you're across the water in Estonia, which is a fellow Finnic language, they share ancestry. People in Soviet times in the USSR who spoke Estonian were watching Finnish TV. Different country, different language, but they were watching TV from Estonia and understanding it basically just fine. So I am of the opinion, and it is just a theory, and I'm happy to be proved wrong, but I haven't been proved wrong just yet, that there is a kind of fundamental equality among languages. Difficulty comes from difference rather than objective complexity.
I'm very happy you said that, and I'm really happy to get your perspective on this, because I really only have my own on this, and that is, perspective is a great word to start with. My perspective is having a certain sound ringing in my ear since I was a child, since I was born, and a certain grammatical structure. And this is very common where as a native English speaker, my English grammar, I'm not conscious of my own English grammar. In fact, my English grammar improved when I studied Spanish, because that's when I realized what I was doing. I was like, oh, I did not realize I do that in English. I did not realize that's how I think. And when I was in the thick of Spanish, it was getting a lot more like intuitive, and I could see something new, and I can almost pick up something new, or a lot more quickly.
Sure.
And one of the things I asked you about cases, and so cases really quickly is like the way in my head, I call it is conjugating a noun.
Sure.
Like we conjugate verbs in Spanish, we conjugate a noun in cases. If I'm the subject, or if an object is the subject, it has a different ending than if the object is a target. And I forgot how.
Yeah,
I forgot.
It could be a target or
whatever
the passive participant, the person who has it done to them. Yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff. And there's also then I think the locational distance, like you include location. Like, is the ball inside of the box? Is it on top of the box? Is it behind the box? And if I remember correctly, there are different ways you could talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine, building an intuition for that. But yeah, my starting point in my brain, my English is that you just use a preposition, and the concept of using anything other than a preposition has never entered my reality. It's
Right.
like not even inside of it. So I can see how that would be that could be related. And I really hope that, I mean, that must answer it, because like, yeah, if a language is overwhelmingly challenging without actually providing any value, then it's going to be either modified
Yeah.
or replaced, and we've seen that over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So that I don't think is
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say that it will be, change will just naturally happen. It will happen at an unconscious level.
Yeah.
Complexity could in language could take the form of, say, two competing systems for saying the same thing. So if you have I don't know, a case-based system and you have a preposition-based system, and there's variety and people are using one or the other, yeah, maybe you could call that, that situation complex, that you have more than you don't need two ways of expressing the same relationship. And naturally, we as historical linguists, I would expect that the situation will resolve itself, like one will win out. Basically, that's a huge driver of change in language. So you can take, for example, the case of of Latin. Latin, it has loads of these cases. Latin nouns change their form according to 6 cases. That's kind of 6 functions, and singular or plural. So really, it's kind of like 12. Whereas Spanish, Italian, French basically have none. How do we get there?
Right.
Well, it's
Right.
because it's because of alternative ways of expressing the same things just win out. Neither's better, but it wins out, and this is all happening towards the end of the Roman Empire. As say, okay, fine, you can express what's known as the dative, so that's to somebody or for somebody. That's the case you use for the recipient of, say, an object, but you can also just use the standalone word to. That's fine. Neither is better than the other, but if both are in play, I expect that situation to resolve itself somehow. And what we see in the descendants of Latin is that the prepositions won out.
That's so fascinating. First of all, I didn't know that Latin had cases.
Oh yeah.
I was completely unaware of that, because it's not at all in Spanish. I've never seen it. I'm a B-level speaker, so
Sure.
I may just not know. But
with one exception, pronouns. Pronouns have it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. See, I don't even think about that.
So you don't even think about
it. It's just so natural.
I think
it's so it's like he, him,
him.
whom, who.
These are cases. These are cases. I, and me. And I know it's not great. I mean, so we've lost them from nouns. English lost them really in the Middle Ages. But they have lingered in pronouns, partly because pronouns express cases by looking really different. This is quite a common thing across languages. Pronouns are just weird in general. So I and me are very different words, and it would be hard to reduce it to just one or the other. Although we have you and you. There's no different ways of saying you. There used to be in the same way that I was the doer and me is the done, the person. So I see you, you see me. There used to be ye and you. Ye, it would be the equivalent for I, and you would be the equivalent for me. But this has just collapsed into just you. Likewise, we had a singular version as well. We had thou and thine, which is like Spanish tú, like it's the singular, second person singular, and that's just completely gone away, with except a couple of pockets in England. But it's been harder to collapse I and me into each other. But I think it's happening right now. I think we're seeing that change in progress. We don't see people say like me am or me go or me want. That is a line that English speakers tend not to cross. But we will say things like Bob and me are going. So we're using me in what's known as the subject position. And this is really taking off. also we're saying things like I'm walking with Bob and I, which historically is incorrect because it should be with Bob and me. Me is the version that you use with. But what I'm seeing, I think we're seeing change happening in English right now, where because English speakers are being told it should be Bob and I are going, eat food, want this, do that. That we're being told, and that we're kind of artificially being told that I is the correct form. People, when they're trying to speak fancy, are putting I into places where it hasn't historically belonged. And I was seeing an increase right now. I watch, comedians, like a lot of US comedians, and increasingly they'll just casually say something in an interview because they're trying to speak their best kind of non-casual language. They'll say things like, "Oh, he gave it to Bob and I," which historically that's incorrect. But in modern English, I think we're going from, in regards to I and me, we're going from a case-based system to like a formality system. That it conditions the difference very gradually.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I've never been conscious of any of this, but I absolutely, if I hear like you and I, or Dan and I, we're just going to blah blah blah.
Yeah.
The "I'd" sounds nicer.
Sounds nicer.
Yeah, it sounds nicer, whatever that means. Yeah. Speaking of formality, I did notice that a lot of languages that I've studied have a formality for you, a formal you.
Sure.
And this is a very tricky thing. And I think actually every language and I think every culture treats it a little bit differently. And so like, I know especially in Spanish, there's tú and usted. And different countries actually use it a little bit differently. Like in some places, you really don't use usted. It's almost insulting. It's like you're putting distance between us. Whereas in other places, you don't say tú until you're more intimate in your relationship. And so it's like, it's interesting how distinguished this is. And in Spanish, or sorry, in English, we don't have this. And I wonder if it ever even came up. I mean, I'm surely it must have been discussed through some periods of time.
Oh, it's, as I say, we used to have it. It was the difference between you and thou. Thou was the
that was formal. Oh, sorry, I thought that was like the.
It was you was formal in later years, but originally it was just plural. So it was like it was like saying vos in Spanish, and thou in Old English it would have been pronounced thu, so even closer to tu. It's that would have been singular for like, and also for informal occasions, people you don't know. But I am aware of the great diversity in the Spanish-speaking world. I don't claim to understand in which country you need to use which one because it all feels very fluid. And I also, in my own life, I'm not a Spanish speaker, but in the various languages that do have this, coming from modern English, it's been hard. It's been really hard to develop an intuition of when to use which one, especially in the gray areas. Certain people in certain social situations where I don't know what I should start off with. I'm thinking in particular of, so Czech has it. It's the difference between te and ve. Sounds a lot like French tu and vous. And say I meet a lady with gray hair and wrinkles on the street, for somebody who's visibly older than me, absolutely it's going to be ve, formal. If I meet her very young grandson, fantastic. It's a child. You can start off with the informal. But when I meet people like doctors and staff of companies, and they hold this position of power, but they're clearly the same age as me, I have no idea what to go with. Are we there or are we there? When I first met my wife's cousin, who was a little bit older than me and I'd never met her before, I stuck my hand out for a handshake and 2 kisses on the cheeks. That's what you should do to be a good Czech. I stuck my hand up and addressed her with the V form, and everybody just laughed. So what are we talking about? That's your wife's cousin. She's like practically your sister-in-law. So it's a minefield, man. It's one where if you're not coming from the system, it's very hard. I also feel I should probably count my blessings because I hear in a lot of East Asian languages like Thai and Japanese, it's this on steroids. So yeah.
There's I think in Korean as well, there's just multiple. It's actually not just 2. There's like multiple levels of the hierarchy. So it's a tough one. But it's funny complain. You mentioned the cheek kiss, the cheek kiss. It's 2 in Czech? Okay.
Yes, it's
so
2.
This is another very challenging thing. I encountered this more when I was nomading, and one of the times I went to Poland was after I had just come out of Turkey, and in Turkey it's also 2. But in Polish it's not 2, it's actually 0. And if you mistakenly do like 2 instead of 0, it's just like, oh, that's very weird. It's just like, it's like that was an oddity. I don't really,
no.
But well, maybe you just have to be closer in Polish. I don't know, but I do remember that, like, and that's just right there across the border. So
that's great.
These things are.
That's a great way to get off on the wrong. I mean, they share a border, but they are quite different countries in so many different ways. And I mean, they're both Slavic languages, but Czech and Polish are quite different, and culturally as well. They've been through very different things as nations. And I was aware of this before I moved here, but I really had it hammered home, the difference between the Czech Republic and Poland, was the very first time I crossed the border. And I'll never forget it. Should have taken a picture. Actually, I don't know how I could have taken a picture. It would have needed to be like a panorama zoom or something. But my wife's family come from the region close to the Polish border, so it's not that it's nothing to kind of go on a accidentally stumble into the country, into Poland, which was not great during lockdown when all the borders closed. I think I had a couple of like illegal strolls that were technically in Poland, but I didn't know. And there was also the whole thing where the Polish army was asked to man the border, and they got the wrong place. They were actually a kilometer into the Czech Republic.
Oh, wow.
And nobody knew until they were challenged by some sort of local grandfather who was like, let me pass. I'm going to pick some berries. I'm not kidding. This was the story as I heard it.
Wow.
And the Polish army stops him and go, you can't go any further. This is Poland. He goes, no, it's not. This is the Czech Republic. I've lived here all my life. So the Polish army had to retreat from this accidental invasion. Anyway, but the very first time
I hope that man gets a statue built after him. That's amazing.
He's a sort of accidental national defender.
Oh yeah.
But so I first crossed this border, and it's just a stream, and I was heading into Poland, and I kid you not, it's just glorious. Like the same style of house on both sides of the border, which is just a river, and the Polish side, being a very Catholic nation, same house, same style of house. It's right there by the stream, and it's Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and Pope John Paul II, local boy. Okay, very Polish, stereotypically Polish. I look back to the Czech Republic where I've just come from, same style of house. There's no religious imagery anywhere. There's just a fat man with his shirt off drinking a can of beer.
Amazing. Amazing.
So there you go.
I really miss traveling through Europe, because you see all those differences right next to each other, and it's something interesting to see. Yeah, I definitely would like to study more Czech history. I think Czech, Austria, Slovakia, there's so much interesting things over there, and going to Prague was one of the, I almost don't want to say it's one of the best cities I've been to, because I don't want everyone to like flood it. Like it has, it's busy enough,
It is busy, but Prague, I would say, can handle it. In general, Prague is manageable. I mean, the tourism has got to stupid levels at certain points, and I actually walked across Charles Bridge this morning, which I don't do very often, and it was not pleasant in terms of the crowds. But the thing is, if you're
August too.
It's August and it's summer, and it so quickly dissipates if you just leave the main tourist trail, and it becomes a very chilled, very friendly place 2 streets over from that main route by Charles Bridge. So yeah, Prague is, you can always get away. Yeah.
What was I going to say about Prague? Yeah, I mean, I think I was mostly in the city center area, and I remember the Franz Kafka had. Oh yeah, two of my favorite novelists. Actually, I need to read more Kafka before I call one of my favorites. But Milan Kundera
Oh,
came out of Prague, and he's
that's right.
absolutely
Brilliant.
brilliant. He's a phenomenal writer.
Yep.
He's one of these people that have ruined modern literature for me because I can't read any books these days that are published within the last 20 years, except for Harry Potter. But because like the bar has been set so high
Yeah.
by the likes of Kundera and other of his colleagues, and even around that time, Bulgakov, I think was really fantastic. But then we got hundreds of years of literary greatness where it's hard to read anything these days. But Kundera is one of those where
That is
if a
brilliant.
book is not better than Kundera, it's hard for me to justify picking it up.
For fiction, because he just
For
combines.
fiction.
There's kind of generation of Czech authors that combined these incredible, very lofty, very abstract themes with a very down to earth, believable story. And that was a special talent, I think, among the communist bloc countries where you couldn't write something very fantastical. You're quite constrained by the demands of socialist realism. But the themes in the background are incredible and, global, world-changing philosophical themes.
Yeah.
And perhaps somebody who does not write like Kundera, but I can absolutely recommend to you before you next come to Prague, have some Harabal. That's Hrabal, Bohumil Harabal. I don't think he was from Prague. He famously lived in a sort of cottage to the east of Prague, which you can still visit, but he would come in very regularly to drink in this one particular pub. And he was so famously, associated with this one particular pub and this one particular seat that when Bill Clinton was in Prague, they could pretty much guarantee that Hrabal was there, and Bill Clinton went to go and meet him. And there's a great picture of them having a beer together. And like Bill Clinton would not have understood a single word that Hrabal was saying, but they're clearly having a great time. But that really is a sort of it gets to the nature of Central Europe and thinking like a Czech with the precision of a surgeon. Very down to earth stories, but with great themes behind them. So yeah, Kundera, Harabal, all good stuff.
That's a real art. That's like to be able to find that balance between the two, and especially around that time too. Like during Soviet occupation is a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple more linguistic questions that I want to dive in on. But how are you doing on time?
I'm fine. Yeah. So at some point, my wife will come home, and I'll make it sound like this is happening under her radar. No, I'm fine. I will. I'll top up water, and I'll come back in a second. If that's okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll refill my coffee and use the bathroom. So we'll say, how about this? How about we come back in 5? Say 5 after. Is that good for you?
Yeah. Okay. Grant.
The classic. You're muted.
Classic's all good.
I don't know if you've worked a corporate job before where you spend a lot of time on Zoom, but there's some things that you just kind of get used to it, and the you're on mute is almost like it's a meme at how often it happens.
Yeah, you just think after the whole pandemic and lockdown thing, we would have cracked this by now.
No, it's funny. I think we just kind of accepted it. The most annoying thing though is some of these apps these days like really infantilize the audience. Like for example, one of them is if you give a thumbs up like this, it creates this emoji animation of thumbs ups everywhere, and you're like, this is like turn off the child version. Like I guess this is great for students and teachers, but it's a bit awkward when you're talking to your boss.
Calm down. I was only saying yes.
I barely agreed. To be honest, I didn't even agree. I was just trying to be polite.
Everything's too positive. I think there's something to be studied there about the reactions, like the kind of enforced positivity. I don't know if you ever found this, but you look at. I send very basic emojis with messages, and the sad face is so far down. You have to wade through all these different expressions of positivity to find a couple of sad faces. Especially if I don't want the crying one, the melodramatic crying one, that's usually towards the top. It's one of the 5 emotions that Facebook allows. Smiling, crying, anger, love, and care. I think that's another one. But like, if I just want the simple, non-crying, sad face, it's so far down the list. I think this speaks to some kind of Brave New World type enforced positivity. I don't know. I've got theories.
Very soon we'll be taking those like those little pills. I forget what they call it.
Soma.
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 That was Brave New World is a good one. Nice. I personally, I'm a big fan of the Orwell stuff, the 1984. Everything is a victory. Victory something, you know.
Yep.
But yeah, we're the enforcement is coming.
Well,
in the meantime,
I hope not. Yeah.
Let's survive the best we can. How did you get into all this, by the way? Anyway, so I think your PhD was in linguistics. You did a formal study in the field. What got you into it? How did you stumble upon this is like what a vast underworld there is to learning how to spell the word right? Why don't I pronounce G and H and right?
Yeah, I mean, the interest in spelling, I would just separate out from the general interest in linguistics. In that the former is much more recent than the latter. The book is about writing and spelling, and that's awesome. But weirdly, it's overlooked a lot within the academic field of linguistics. Ever since the field got started, it had to extract itself from what came before, which was very much the study of texts and ancient Greek and ancient Latin. And in establishing itself, in correctly trying to separate itself out as a field, it really leaned into a focus on speech at the cost of, say, writing and also sign language, which is also valid. Sign languages are also languages, but nonetheless have struggled to be represented in the field. Writing is very much overlooked. And I can say this because I've run the gauntlet of linguistics. I kind of gradually realized that it was a thing when I was at high school, and I signed up to do a bachelor's degree, then I did a master's degree, and then I did a PhD. So I've done it, completed it.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. I would have expected that writing would take priority only because it's a written artifact, right? Like we didn't have tape recorders when Caesar was in charge. We didn't have Alexander the Great speaking memos into a digital recorder. So I had the assumption from the beginning that writing would have been stricter. I also had, or at least more studied, I also had the impression that writing would be very strict and static for some reason. I mean, now I say some reason, but it was because, my brain just cannot fathom a dynamic, changing spelling. My brain cannot fathom the introduction of a new letter or a rejection of a letter.
Sure. So you'd be right. You'd be right in thinking that writing was prioritized. That's largely the case for most of Western academic history, right back to the ancient Greeks, when the Greeks started to write things down. We revered these texts, we studied them, we reacted to them. Not just Greek philosophy, but things like the Bible, scripture. It's all very word-centric. But this kind of scholarly endeavor is quite, I don't say limited, but it's thinking about these texts in very specific ways. Like, what does the author mean in this case? Why did they choose this word? How many times does this word come up? This is traditional, stuff for the study of Latin and ancient Greek. What I mean is, what I'd like to say is actually that the study of writing is a lot bigger than that. So things like tracking the development of letters, tracking the motions and the muscular motor skills that are used in spelling, that's just not on the radar for most of history. But what I'm getting at with regards to linguistics is that because you had this very text-based study and interest in language, modern linguistics, which is a kind of a product of the 19th century, but reaches its form as we would recognize it in the, let's say, 1910s to 1950s. It's very gradual emergence. It tries to separate itself out and goes in the opposite direction. Because rather than being interested in texts for the text's sake, being interested in them because they are special documents. It's trying to get back to some kind of language with a capital L, some human capacity for language that could be expressed in text but is more commonly expressed in speech. And this really defines linguistics. Rather than being the study of ancient texts or even more recent ones, it's the study of language, this human capacity for doing this thing that I'm doing right now. That's what modern linguistics aims to study. So consequently, as a field, when it's born, it completely veers off in the opposite direction and almost forgets about writing, forgets about how writing and speech interact. It's very speech focused because speech is like, it's in the here and now. It's the thing that we learn start doing as infants. It's the thing that we do all the time with each other. Writing less so. Like the vast majority of humans speak. Fewer humans write, especially historically. Writing follows speech in our own personal development, and it also follows in the development of humans as a species by several tens of thousands of years. So there was this huge sense that, a reasonable but maybe not an entirely correct shift towards speech within linguistics that I think now people who are trying to study writing holistically, far beyond just individual texts, but as an activity and as an expression of language, are actually, weirdly, they're having quite a hard time making themselves heard. I know these people engaged in the study. Number one problem that they face, there's no word for the study of writing. I know these people, I join in their meetings, they just call it the study of writing. Some people have suggested like graphology or graphemics. There's no accepted word. So they're facing an uphill battle because of how linguistics veered off towards speech.
That, it's like, it's on the one hand is counterintuitive, but I think when you kind of explain that, it does make sense. And this is what I mean by that. So yeah, I think up until the printing press, the ability to read was limited. I mean, I think there are waves in history where the population was more literate and less literate, more literate. But for the most part, writing was very much a specialty. And I at least during the Roman Empire, I think it was highly related to religious texts. This may have been true of the Greeks as well, but it was a specialty. I mean, even like when the Vikings invaded, the initial Viking invasion of the British Isles, I think like it was the scribes who were writing things in churches, and the spread of the written language, I believe, was related to that. So all of this, I suppose it does speak to the limited populace in terms of writing. But on the other hand, this concept of hieroglyphics, I think, is a bit majestic, in at least as an outsider.
Sure.
Which is to say, like, hieroglyphics, that sounds super cool. What is that? And I one thing I really did want to mention, this is like in your first chapter, which started to sort of unlock everything else, is that I think it was the concept of acronyms or
acrophonic principle.
Acrophonic principle.
That's the
Can
good
you
stuff.
explain what that is? Because I think that unlocks, like, that opens up to understanding everything else.
Sure. Yeah. Hieroglyphs is a very reasonable thing. It's kind of impressive word. I mean, it's a Greek term. It literally means holy writing or priestly symbols. You could say hieros plus glyphos. Like it's a Greek term that indicates that hieroglyphs are, in many cultures, they are fancy. They're fancy, posh things that professionals would write down. But there's lots of ways of using that word. So when I tend to say Egyptian hieroglyphs, I'm thinking a lot further than simply the beautiful things on the tombs of the pharaohs. It's all of traditional culture of Egyptian writing, which did include some non-fancy expressions. Within the history of ancient Egypt, you have your beautiful hieroglyphs that take a long time to create, but they're kind of like one end of a scale. And you did have simpler, more rapid writing that your everyday people could write down as well. I mean, to start off with, it's called hieratic, and then later it's known as demotic. So all of this is happening under the shadow of these beautiful hieroglyphs. So I just want to say it's not a completely straightforward term, but what we seem to have in ancient Egypt is a writing system. I'm just going to call it hieroglyphs for short. That is, to begin with, it's pictographic. You are basically writing down things that look like things. They resemble something in the world in smaller two-dimensional shape, right? And it's a super old system of writing. It goes back to the fourth millennium BC, possibly inspired by similar symbols happening in Mesopotamia, so what is now Iraq. So that's also a big topic, whether the Egyptians would have, came up with this from scratch or whether they were inspired by other people. But it's kind of the birth of writing as we know it. And this system is super sophisticated. Within several centuries, Egyptian hieroglyphs are a very complex system that works really well for writing down Egyptian speech. It's not purely pictographic in that it's not just writing down symbols that look like things anymore. You're writing down symbols for abstract concepts, or symbols for a single sound, or two sounds, or three sounds, and they're all interacting with each other. It's a very Egyptian hieroglyphs, if anybody's dabbled in it, it's a complex system, but it worked. It worked really well. And it reaches a state of complexity and sophistication within a few centuries. And it continues this way, till the final hieroglyphs, which are written in, the final ones that we have are written in the 4th century AD. So that's 3,600 years of using this writing system in Egypt. It's super, super old. And around about the kind of midpoint in that story, in what's known as the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt, you seem to have a population of non-native Egyptian speakers, so people who aren't native speakers of Egyptian. They're immigrants. They've come from what we think of as the Middle East or the Levant, and they speak a pretty different language. It's called, we just refer to it as a Semitic language. It's part of a language family. It today includes Arabic and Hebrew, things like that.
And ancient Aramaic as well. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Aramaic was also part of that.
Aramaic, absolutely. These are all West Semitic languages, super old language family. And it seems that we have a population of these people round about the year 2000 to 2000 to 1200 BC in Egypt, living, working, thriving, and wanting their own writing system. Hieroglyphs are designed for the Egyptian language. We'd like our own. And what they seem to do round about this time is take a set of established hieroglyphs, existing symbols, but radically repurpose them and redesign them to suit their language, which, as I say, is a very different language. It works, the sounds are quite different. The words are completely different. And the way that they redesign it is that rather than go with the complexity of existing Egyptian writing, it's a very simple system. It's one sound, or specifically one consonant sound of their Semitic language for one symbol. So they could take, an existing hieroglyph like a head of cattle and assign it to a single consonant in their language. This is the origin of the alphabet. This is where the alphabet that we know and love, it's kind of where this tradition of writing has its single root. And the acrophonic principle is the way that they redesigned hieroglyphs, so the way that they revolutionized it, or had this kind of definite break with Egyptian writing. Because how did they choose which symbol was going to represent which sound? The way that they worked this out is a kind of 3 or 4 step process, simple process, but a few leaps involved, where every symbol, every hieroglyph looks like a thing, and their Semitic language has a word for that thing. And that word in speech starts with a consonant sound. And so now that consonant sound is what that symbol stands for. It's kind of a 3 or 4 step process. So let's take a good example. You could have a kind of crude Egyptian image of a house. The word for house in their Semitic language was something like Bate. it still is something like that in a lot of Semitic languages today, such as Arabic.
And you mentioned Bethlehem.
Bethlehem.
The Beth is
Yeah.
from, yeah.
It's Beit Lahem. It's probably the house of food or the house of meat originally. But now the word bait, or would it be bait or would it be bite? I think it's actually pretty pronounced bite originally. This starts with the consonant b. So now an image, a hieroglyph of a bite is what the symbol it stands for a b sound. That's known as the acrophonic principle. I'll give another example. You can have a head of cattle, like a ox's head, with horns, eyes, a mouth, that sort of thing. And this, in their language, is called an alp. That's the word. This starts with a glottal stop. Like, it doesn't start with the vowel a. It starts with a glottal stop in your throat, like a. So it's alp. And now, thanks to the acrophonic principle, the head of cattle, the image, alp, stands for the sound stands for that. They think of that as a separate consonant. Many languages of the world think of this as a separate consonant, such as Arabic to this day. So you have alp, bait. These are the two symbols with two names that represents the sound and the sound b. This is the origin of alphabet. So the symbols will travel up the coast of the Mediterranean in a kind of anti-clockwise motion. They'll first go to the Middle East. They'll be simplified in the way that they look. They're passed on to the Greeks. The Greeks change. They don't need the letter alp to stand for the glottal stop. They don't need it, but they make it stand for the vowel r instead. The name of the letter goes from alp to alpa to alpha. You see where I'm going with this. These two very kind of sophisticated symbols in the way that they look, they're quite complex to begin with, will change the sound, the way that they stand on the page, the way that they look. But we eventually have A and B. And it's all to do with the acrophonic principle. It's about matching the sounds of a Semitic language quite far away to Egyptian symbols also quite far away. But from this, our alphabet is born.
This is 4,000 years of history for the technology of the alphabet, which is so remarkable. And it almost sounds like, as I was reading it, it almost sounded obvious. Like, of course, if I were a child trying to create an alphabet, of course I would use the sound, and the first letter of the sound makes a lot of sense, and it's a very natural invention in some ways. And of course, things get a lot hairier later. I there's that joke in there about, I think the alphabet is normal up until you get to like T, or after that it falls apart or something like that. But it's a different history that comes in. But the alphabet, alpha, beta, gamma, for American listeners, I think there are two ways you would come across the Greek alphabet. My way, which was studying math and physics and engineering, we use those as algebraic unknowns, or no, parameters actually more commonly. So alpha, beta, gamma, eta. My personal favorite, I'm not sure the best pronunciation to it, but we used to call it the dragon, and it was the lowercase c.
Oh, well, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. It's a beautiful one. It's a lot of fun when you kind of figure out how to draw it. I think the capital one is the 3 horizontal bars. The other way Americans would learn about it is through what we call Greek life in universities, and that's really just if you join a party house.
Oh, yes, I've heard about this.
Sororities and fraternities.
Yes, people say like I'm part of Kappa Lambda or something. I'm happy for you.
To be honest, I don't understand it either. My university, I think we had them, but they were not really that popular. So the Greek life that's depicted, I keep, I call it Greek life. I think it's anything but Greek, to be honest.
No, I think it's extremely American. Yeah.
It's very American. But for whatever reason, they adopted the Greek letters.
There you go. And that's just it. I mean, unfortunately, I would say unfortunately, it's not the end of the world, but for the Greeks keep up these very old names. So the Greek alphabet, the names are called alpha, beta, gamma, or today it's more like alpha, vita, gamma. So the letter names of changed as the sounds that they represent have changed a bit for Greek, but nonetheless, the basics are these extremely old names that are how the letters got their sounds. But there is this kind of moment of separation, or we're a little bit removed in the Latin alphabet. The Latin alphabet that we use for English comes from Greek and from the Greeks, this original system in Egypt. But nonetheless, there are many breaks that might obscure the connections. Some things remain somewhat visible. The capital letter A, which I love, is still somewhat the upside down ox's head. The legs are actually its horns, and the point is actually its mouth, which I love. But a big break in one of the aspects of the letters are their names. It does seem to be when we reach Italy, when the alphabet sails in antiquity from Greece to Iron Age Italy, that by one of the populations of Italy at that time, possibly the Etruscans, if people have heard of them, but more likely the Romans, the letters get renamed. These names, alpha, beta, gamma, they're too complicated, they're too long. Let's just simplify, A, B, K, D, these are the names for the Romans, and these provide the basis for the English names A, B, C, D, E. So there's a break, which means that that glorious history that goes all the way back to these ancient words in a Semitic language in English is more obscure for people who use the Latin alphabet.
Yeah. It is interesting though. We still call it the alphabet, alpha, beta. Like that has stayed. We don't call it abecedory. Well, I guess we would colloquially call it your ABCs, but
your ABCs.
In the US at least.
Same principle.
Still,
some languages do. Some languages don't use the word alphabet though. That has surprised me from time to time. Certain European languages they might say abeceda or something like that. But in English, we use alphabet. So that is nice. And when I'm trying to kind of keep my reader on side and hook them with little fun facts that, keep them interested and delighting and keep them reading, most importantly, then the word alphabet is a good one.
There's a few more things I hope to chat with you about, but I want to be conscious of your time. You're still good?
I mean, my voice is. It's creaky. I think I've got a couple more questions left, and I think.
All right, I got two more. Then I have to restrict myself.
Okay.
Because I wanted to chat about runes. I want to chat about Georgian alphabets and other scripts, but there's actually one that has really really bothered me.
Okay.
And I got to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, which is we talk a lot about the Norman entrance into England, so 1066, that big date where up until then the English was it was that combination of the Germanic roots with a lot of Latinized influences.
A bit.
Now and now the Normans come in, and we kind of go back and forth and say there was a heavy influx of influence between Old French and Old Norman into the English language.
Sure.
Now, my question, the thing that I don't understand is why what exactly is Old French? Is it true that, if I understood it correctly, that this is born out of the Norsemen, the Old Norse, that they came in France and Paris, and then they kind of infused like whatever became Old French? And how exactly did we go from the fall of the Roman Empire and Latin and say, I think the 400s, into what became a separate language called Old French in 1066? So you said only one or two questions.
That's a good one.
And so my secret was to put 10 questions in one. That's my sneaky way to get around it, because I have one more for you, please.
Okay. Well, you didn't get Georgian into this question, so that's you've been very restrained. Very restrained.
That one I'll leave for another day.
Any mention of Georgian is always appreciated. So I'll start off with what is Old French. Old French is pretty straightforwardly a offshoot of Latin. It's everyday spoken Latin as it was spoken in and around Paris, central-ish France. Old French has a lot of other influences that come into it. We noticed that the Romans called that place or that region Gaul. We don't use that word today. We call it France. That comes from the Franks. The Franks spoke a Germanic language, a kind of close relative of German and Dutch, and they set the Kingdom of France up. It's West Francia to begin with, but nonetheless, their Germanic language is kind of absorbed into the general population. There are plenty of Frankish words in French, but Old French is overwhelmingly the everyday Latin spoken around Paris with some Germanic sprinkled in, okay, because thanks to the Franks. However, then later on, as Old French is emerging and people are starting to recognize that this is a different language from Latin, they're putting their language side by Latin text and going, come on, guys, like this is clearly a different thing. Famously, you have some emperors and kings who realize that if they need to swear oaths before their soldiers and before their fellow kings, they need to swear them in French, and they put this side by side with the Latins. Like this is clearly a different language by this point in time. But in the north of France, from what would this be? Sort of the year 800 onwards. No, that doesn't feel right. No, I think it is 800 onwards. You have increasing incursions of Norsemen, so people from Scandinavia. Do you know what? I'm just going to check that date. There's one king of France who does a deal with them. He's the brilliantly named King Rollo of King Rollo, Viking Count. Hang on, just checking my dates. Yes, okay, so I was sort of on the money. Around about 800 to 900 AD, and he's a Viking. And he does a deal with the king of Francia or West Francia called Charles the Simple. So I think the deal was going to go very well for him, I think, if you're dealing with people called Charles the Simple, probably named by people who didn't like the deal. But the deal basically said that he and his Norsemen, or basically Vikings, would behave so long as, and they would promise to be faithful to the king of West Francia. And in return, they got what became Normandy, that part of northern France. And what that means linguistically is that you have a kind of Old French or a descendant of Latin spoken on the northern coast of France that has all these Scandinavian influences coming in. It's already maybe a bit different. It's kind of a separate dialect of Old French, but it's peppered with Norse words. And this, I don't like to call it Old French. I like to call it Old Norman, because it's the language of the Normans. It's this that gets brought over to England, which means that you have in Western Europe this incredible mishmash and confluence of languages. It's incredible. You've got Old English being brought over to Britain. It's Germanic. You have the Franks setting up France and giving lots of Frankish Germanic words to French, but these words then might be brought over by the Normans. So the Germanic words absorbed into French, then brought over by the Normans and French rulers into England. So this is Germanic words going via a different direction. Then you might have Scandinavian words entering Norman, and these then finding root in England. It's all a big mishmash of sort of, offshoots of Latin and Germanic languages from across Europe, from what is now Germany, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia, and they're all arriving in Britain via different routes. It's a glorious mishmash, and it's part of fun of etymology is untangling these different sources.
That's so fascinating. What's crazy to me is I had this question, what exactly is Old French and Old Norman, and what is the I did not realize there was influence from the Norsemen as well. But it's what's so crazy about this is all right, so we've got this Germanic language that enters into the UK, and it's Latin infused, and all right, boom, that's a language. On the other side, across the channel, we have this other Germanic infusion with Latinized, with some sort of Latinization, which becomes French. And so now you have two German Latin languages that have quite, that are different and distinct, and then they mash up together, and ultimately we get English. This is so crazy. If we were to map this out on a tree of how this thing evolved, it's an absolute beautiful, chaotic mess. And the more I learn about this,
it is
a couple things. One, I realize I'm never going to know this like in an exhaustive nature, but that's so exciting because like every turn is like, how does the story get even more deep? Like there's got to be a bottom to this, and I don't think there is.
Well, it is complicated. It's enjoyably complicated because people are complicated. We're not dealing with big blocks of stuff interacting with each other. We're dealing with individuals. All of linguistics needs to be appreciated not only at the macro level, because it's easier to appreciate things. We talk about things like English and Old French and Frankish, but we mustn't lose sight of the fact that this is being taken and spread around the place by individuals. An individual might go in one direction, another direction. They might follow this lord or that lord. That lord may decide to move his army over there. Sometimes it helps to think of linguistics in terms of, say, atoms. Any portion of air contains lots of different molecules in it. They're all bouncing around the place, and so too are people. In history, they're all bouncing around the place, and over time, if you were to take some sample of normal, human air, I'm going to say human air, like daily stuff around you, you would test it, and overall, it would be a lot of hydrogen, it'd be a lot of nitrogen, but there may be other ingredients in there as well. And okay, fine, it might be easy to say, well, this is a huge sample of nitrogen, but there's other stuff in there as well. It's all complicated because individual humans may not be complicated, but en masse, we can be quite hard to keep track of. And our language and our linguistic history reflects that.
Beautiful. We have this, we encounter this mishmash of history and like all these decisions and uses of language that have been made every single day without, the more we think about it, the more exciting it gets. Listen, Danny, I will let you go, but I did see on your website that you do have, so happy to see this. You have a second book cooking. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
Yes.
Cooking, okay. I think, yeah. It's in the microwave, I think, rather than cooking.
Fair enough. Whatever it is, I'm excited for it. And I was thinking, I think on your website, you said that you don't have a name for it yet. And so I have a proposition for a name. Okay. And I got this from your book. All right. This is from a gentleman named Orm. A gentleman named Orm, Middle English from the 12th to 13th century, who wrote a manuscript on sermons. And in the introduction to one of those books, he writes, "This book is named Ormulum because Orm made it." So I believe this lends itself to a very simple title.
Nice.
Danulum.
Do you know what's pretty good? That is pretty good. I might think about it. I think
this is my proposal. Your editor already, your publisher already hates me. They're like,
I'm afraid so. I mean, it's ideally the title is what grabs people in your local bookstore. So I'm not sure they'll buy it, but I really like that. Do you know what? That has never occurred to me, and I've spent a lot of time with Orm. So thank you very much.
I'm happy to make that proposal.
The Danulum. This book is named Danulum because Danny, wrote it. Love it.
Yeah. I love the explanation to it too. It's just short and sweet. I don't know if like the appendix ulum or like if that suffix means anything outside of what Orm decided, but I love it. He's like, listen, this book is called it's like me saying this podcast is called Hugh's Podcast because Hugh is a podcaster. It's like, it's so self-evident, and he took the time to write it. He was like, this must be known. I am Orm. My book is Ormulum. Nobody will ever pronounce this or speak this in a different manner.
Absolutely.
End of story.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You didn't really need to do that. I mean, if you just leave a book without a title, people will probably fill in for you that this is Danny's book or this is Hugh's podcast. So, yeah. I don't know why he did that. He was a funny guy. He was doing his own thing in medieval England, basically reinventing spelling in the 12th century. And I love him for it. I think he was quite a character.
The more I learn about this guy, the more I love this guy. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Danny, I'm going to let you go. Just stick around for a second and I'll cut the recording.
Of course.